Okay, I am a senior lecturer in film. I specialise in film history. I specialise in about the first 35-ish years of film history. And I've studied the entire institution of film production, film distribution, film exhibition, and cinema going as well during that entire period. So all the way from the establishment of the first film production companies to the establishment of the first film fan magazines. And when you work on this early period of film history, before about 1920, you automatically work on the many other cultural forms that film shared venues and stages with at this time. So I have spent the last 12 years, for example, editing a journal on 19th century and early 20th century visual culture. And articles in that journal that I've edited include photography, articles on photography, illustration, optical toys, stage illusions, circus, and music hall. So as an early film nerd, you're just automatically into other things as well, these close cousins of the medium I work on. So I jumped at the chance to get involved in the Tyne Theatre project. Evening. Can you take a seat? And I did a lot of the shovel work that was needed as part of this project to enable the volunteers to build the 52-year history of nearly every performance at the theatre between 1867 and 1919. And with a lot of film exhibition happening at the theatre in the 2 decades before it became a cinema in 1919, I wasn't at all short of early film history nerd stuff to be sinking my own teeth into. I did not need to go looking at the Stoll Picture Theatre years to do a lot of film exhibition history, just looking at the Tyne Theatre. And it was therefore a bit of a pleasant bonus to find that Rachel has managed to motivate an nearly entirely new crew of people to continue doing the history of this venue past 1919 without needing any help from me. Pleasant surprise. Now, I feel like what I should be doing at this point is walking off into the sunset, brushing my hands and saying my work here is done. And depending on how much people wish to share today, that may be almost entirely what I do. But as ever, I've always got some things to show you. I do feel like the person who just pops up and goes, "Oh, I've got something to show you," just at the very least by way of a warm-up. And I've got a few things for you to look at too. So I am going to take us back to the start of 1919. Now, as ever, the beginning of 1919 was the height of the theatre season, with the theatre continuing to stage the pantomime that had started on Christmas Eve. This year it was Humpty Dumpty, and they continued to stage it for all of January and then on into early February. There it is advertised in the Newcastle Evening Chronicle. And then from the 10th of February 1919, the theatre hosted the Neville Graham Company for 3 weeks in a production called The Maid of the East, which was a new comic opera by Edward Laurie and Davy Burnaby with music by William Neal. And here are some details from the programme for this production that survives in Newcastle City Library. So you'll see that it's classic comic opera stuff. The lead role is Bango Bing. It's set in a fictional imperial territory called Buzurampur. You get the idea. It's a comic opera. Okay, so the last performance of this was on the 1st of March, a Saturday, 1919, and the venue then went dark. The venue, it seems, simply went out of business. But probably even before the venue closed, this man had arranged to buy it. Oswald Stoll, born 1866, died in 1942. Shown here in 1914, aged 48. He was born in Australia, he grew up in Liverpool, and he started a business with his mother, managing music halls in the late 1880s. And by the early 1890s, he was establishing a small chain of Empire Palace music halls around the west of England and Wales. In 1895, he went into business with Edward Moss, who was the chairperson of the Moss Thornton Music Hall Circuit, which then became the Moss Thornton Stoll Music Hall Circuit. And by 1905, this music hall circuit, Moss Thornton Stoll, it had 37 music halls around the UK, 23 of which were just called The Empire. There was an Empire in Newcastle on Newgate Street, which was one of these Moss, Thornton, Stoll music halls. This opened in 1890, and it doesn't exist anymore. It's at the location that is now the Newgate shopping complex on Newgate Street. Now these venues, they included the London Coliseum as well, the Manchester Hippodrome and the Hackney Empire. And Stoll went independent from the Moss, Thornton, Stoll company in 1910. And he took a segment of the company with him, a segment of these music halls, which he just called Stoll Theatres Limited. And Stoll even organised the first Royal Variety performance in July 1912, a bit of upward social mobility for this very working class institution that was music hall in 1912. He expanded his music hall business to include cinemas during the First World War, often by converting existing buildings. And the earliest of these Stoll Picture Theatres that I can find was the former Hippodrome in Bristol. That became a Stoll Picture Theatre in 1915. And he specialised in converting theatres and music halls into cinemas. He converted the London Opera House into a Stoll in 1916, 1917-ish. And in the same year that the Tyne Theatre became a Stoll Picture Theatre, Oswald Stoll here became Sir Oswald Stoll. And after some initial work to the interior of the building, the venue reopened as a Stoll Picture Theatre on Monday, the 2nd of June, 1919. And this is a photo from 1974, but it gives you a sense of how much the interior of the theatre changed to become the Stoll Picture Theatre, which is to say, not much at all. It's a screen on a stage. But a projection box was, of course, installed. And this is from the Newcastle Daily Journal the next day. So, this is from the Newcastle Evening Chronicle even. This is from the Newcastle Daily Journal the next day. Quote, Stoll Picture House. The Stoll Picture House made a most auspicious start yesterday, and from the official opening ceremony at 2 o'clock until closing time, the renovated and now beautiful theatre was crowded by an audience which was as much pleased with the new scheme of decoration as it was delighted with the well-contrasted programme. The theatre was officially opened by the Lord Mayor of the city, Councillor A. Munro Sutherland, who said he had no doubt Sir Oswald Stoll would secure the success he deserved in his new enterprise. The chief item in the long and varied programme was Tarzan of the Apes, a pictorial version of Edgar Rice Burroughs' popular and fascinating novel. The film produces with vividness and fidelity thrilling jungle scenes in which wild animals play a leading part. Other items include Fatty Arbuckle in Camping Out, comedy, and a fine series of topical events which comprise the launch at Elsick of the San Fernando. Miss Doris Ashton is the vocalist. So we had a 3-hour programme here, which started at 2 in the afternoon, and it wasn't just Tarzan of the Apes. This film, Tarzan of the Apes, it had been released in the US in January 1918, so over a year beforehand, and it was 8 reels long. Each reel is 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet is about 12 minutes, so that would have lasted over 2 hours, about 133 minutes. So quite a long film, but this programme was longer than 2 hours. It also included this local event film about a launch of the San Fernando at Elsick, and Camping Out, a comedy released in the US in January 1919, starring Roscoe Arbuckle. 2 reels long, that would have lasted about 33 minutes. So we still have a relatively variety format film programme going on, even with an 8-reel feature film as its main item. And notice that in this advertisement, this 3-hour programme is going to be shown from 2 p.m. until 10 p.m. It's going to be shown for 8 hours, so it's probably going to be shown 3 times in all. This is a continuous performance format where you could theoretically come in halfway through one performance and stay to watch the remainder of that and then the first half of the next one. And notice also that live performance was still an element of the entertainment here. The venue had a symphony orchestra and it had a vocalist too. And I'll come back to this vocalist. Now this programme that featured Tarzan of the Apes, it lasted for a week, But this was something of a novelty at the time, because the norm at the time was to change your films every 3 days. You'd show a programme of films Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, change it on the Thursday, show that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and close on the Sunday, of course. And this feels a bit alien to us now, when we can reliably go and see a film at a cinema for about 2 weeks. A film will run at a cinema for about 2 weeks now. This is a much more frenetic, using up its product kind of marketplace, where something will play in a cinema typically for just 3 days, and then that's it. It might then move on to a different cinema and a different cinema. This would have been a first-run cinema, the Stoll, where films played initially before then moving out into the suburbs. So if you look at the next 2 programmes at the cinema, we have a programme made up of 3 films playing on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and we have a different programme made up of at least 2 films playing on Thursday, Friday and Saturday. And in these advertisements, also from the Evening Chronicle, there are some other interesting details, including that the vocalist in both of these programmes, the vocalist, Ethel Hook, will not be singing during the films. This is live performance interspersed between the films. We still have live performances happening on this stage, and they're not just accompaniments to a visual element that needs a bit of sound to go with it, because we don't yet have synchronized sound. No, they are in addition to any music being played during the films. So this is a mixed film and variety performance. And also, it can be accompanied by teas and light refreshments in the Winter Garden, or the Winter Garden Cafe, as it's called here, and here, teas and light refreshments in the Winter Garden, which was the grand salon of the Tyne Theatre, with a little bit of redecoration. There it is from 1925 to 1933. And with a bit of poking from David, I've looked into when the Grand Salon was itself opened way back in the Tyne Theatre years. I've looked at what it previously was before that. For a brief period, it was a toilet. And before that, it was other things in the storeroom. And then before that, it was a music hall. This is a room with some history. And I'm very excited about the prospect of maybe one day seeing this room restored to about this state, because it's currently divided up into at least 3 separate rooms, isn't it, David? Ish. And lovely rooms, of course, but not this rather gorgeous edifice. Okay, now I've done just a little bit of research on this first year, this 1919 year of the Stoll. And I've looked at what films the Stoll was showing during the first 6 months, so June to October 1919. Now, in this time, the cinema named 84 films in its advertisements. 4 of these films were non-fiction, so let's look just at the fiction films. 80 fiction films. 70 of them were made in the USA. 9 even were made in the UK, and 1 was Italian. And this was normal at the time. The US film industry had come to dominate screens in the UK even before the First World War, and the war increased that dominance yet further. But let's take a little look at these 9 films that were made in the UK, because amongst them is this film, Comradeship, directed by Maurice Elvey. It showed at the Stoll in late September 1919. This was a film produced by Stoll Picture Productions. Oswald Stoll had set up Stoll Picture Productions in 1918 with studios in Surbiton and Cricklewood. And this company would become one of the biggest film production companies in the UK and continue to function until 1934. And Maurice Elvey here, who was born William Seward Folkard, was actually born in Stockton-on-Tees in 1887. So perhaps, depending upon how expansively we're defining this region, we might consider Elvey to be a local boy. He became one of the most prolific British filmmakers of the period. Now this film, Comradeship, it starred Lily Elsie, Gerald Ames and Guy Newell, and it was about injured servicemen during the First World War, and it was one of the first fiction films about the First World War released in the UK after the end of the war. This is the Stoll Film Company advertising this film to the trade in January 1919. It's Stoll's first British production. That is, there was clearly an expectation that all of the Stoll Picture Theatres would show the productions of the Stoll picture company.